Good morning. Thanks for joining us on Close Up. I'm Steve Botari in for Adam Sexton. 6 months from now, we will likely be in the final stretches of the New Hampshire primary campaign season. Granite State voters given the task of winnowing the field of candidates. On the Republican side, it is a large field, approaching 2016 numbers at this point. One of those presidential hopefuls joins us today, former conservative radio host Larry Elder. Thanks for being here with us, Mr. Elder.
Steve, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And I want to point out for our voters, too, in terms of elected office, you ran to replace Gavin Newsom during the 2021 recall effort. The recall effort failed by a wide margin. You finished first, though, among the replacement candidates.
Right, and I had never run for anything before, Steve, well, other than third grade class president. I never thought I would, and you're right, I finished number one in all of the other 46 replacement rivals. I got 3.5 million votes. California has 58 counties. On the replacement side, I carried 57 and 58. And I wasn't the candidate that the state party wanted or the national party wanted. I was an insurgent candidate. I got in with just 8 weeks left, raised $27 million, more than all the other 45 rivals combined. And I got about 150,000 individual donors. Half of them came from outside of California, because people know that as goes California, goes the rest of the nation. And when I was finished, I go to Key West to chill out. And so many people came up to me and said, I contributed to you. I watched your race. Why don't you run for president? I thought they were nuts. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought I had something to contribute. And I know I have something to say. That's why I'm doing this. If I thought, Steve, that Donald Trump was both nominatable, which he obviously is, and electable, you and I wouldn't be here. I believe that so many swing voters, for reasons that I think are almost entirely unfair, would not vote for the man if he walked on water. In fact, if he did, they'd accuse him of not being able to swim. And I have no idea what to do about Trump derangement syndrome. Maybe someday somebody will develop a vaccine, but until then, we have a problem, and that problem is called electability. And I want to make the case by going to Iowa and New Hampshire, and the first debate is in August in Milwaukee.
Right.
I've got to get 40,000 individual donors to qualify. So I'm asking people to go to elderforpresident.com, throw something in the tip jar. It can be as little as $1, get me up there in that debate stage. And once I get up there in that debate stage, Steve, it is game on, hold my beer.
Well, so at this point, are you at that 40,000 mark? Are you still trying to reach it?
No, we're short of it. We've got a lot of work to do. And, you know, I had some issues with the criteria. The Democrats in 2020 allowed you to be on the debate if you either had 1% or above in the polls, which we do, or a certain number of donors. In the case of the RNC, they're requiring you to have at least 1% plus a certain number of donors. So it seems a little onerous, but rather than complain about it, we're going to make sure we meet it.
Yeah, well, you think, you know, it is essentially mandatory that the person who's going to be the nominee be on that first debate stage?
I think so. You know, I've got to make my case. A lot of Americans don't know me, and I want to talk about the obvious issues, the borders, the inflation, the crime, the fact that kids have lost a whole year because of being shut down with COVID. And the absolute crucial need for school choice. But I also want to, Steve, add the other issues that I think I bring uniquely to the table. And that is to denounce this notion that Democrats always push that America is systemically racist. It is getting people killed. The police are pulling back because they're demoralized, because they're called systemically racist, and crime has gone up in virtually every major city. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are dead who otherwise wouldn't be dead if the police were doing their normal proactive policing. Also, we've got to talk about the absolute need for school choice. There are 53 public schools in Chicago, I'm not making this up, where 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. 13 public high schools in Baltimore, 0% of the kids can do math at grade level. Nationwide, 85% of black 13-year-old 8th graders can neither do math nor read at grade level. Half of them can't even do basic reading, which means a large percentage of 13-year-old black kids in America, Steve, are functionally illiterate. It is a national scandal, a national crisis. The other thing I bring to the table is to talk about the 10,000-pound elephant in the room. The epidemic of fatherlessness. 70% of black kids today enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. 40% of all American kids do. And the stats are clear. If you were raised without a father, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. What we've done with our welfare state, in my opinion, is we've incentivized women to marry the government, and we've incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And we don't talk enough about this.
And Mr. Elder, I've heard you talk about this a few times. In 2023, in America, sometimes there's 2 moms, 2 dads. How does that fit into your picture of America?
Well, that's the ideal. to have two moms and two dads. And a lot of kids don't have two moms and two dads. As I said, the stats show that when you don't have that, there are all sorts of negative social consequences. We need to encourage people to not bring people into the world that they cannot feed, clothe, house, and educate. To do otherwise, to me, is almost a moral equivalent of a drive-by shooting. We need to encourage that.
So we've heard you talk about some of the issues you want to talk about in this campaign. In terms of the campaign itself, you know, the structure to get to the nomination, there's a long list of other candidates in this race. You've talked about the fact that you think there should be a Trump alternative, and essentially that voters shouldn't have to choose between the current president and the previous president, that there should be some other option. You mentioned the electability argument. So, so what is it that separates you from everyone else in this field, from DeSantis, Pence, Haley, who are all kind of making the same pitch that, yes, we agree with this America First policy, but we're not Donald Trump?
I think, Steve, it's going to come down to likability, with whom the voters feel most comfortable. And that's why they've got to know me. That's why we've got to get up there in the debate stage. I'm not sure that the issues for most of us are going to be all that different. We all know that the Trump policies on the borders work. We all know that Biden has spent trillions of dollars, which has helped to cause inflation. We all know he's done this war on oil and gas, which also has contributed to inflation. We all know that crime is up dramatically. We've got these soft on crime George Soros DAs all over the place. We need to do something about that. But I think voters ultimately are going to have to choose somebody they feel comfortable with. And it's going to come down to that. Likability, comfortable, how comfortable people are, and how knowledgeable people think they are. I've been talking about these issues, Steve, for 40 years. I've had a 40-year career in TV and radio. I've been a syndicated column since April of 1998. I've written 1,200 columns. You want to know what I think? Go online. I've got an opinion about virtually everything. And so, are you knowledgeable? Are you likable? Can you get the job done? Are you going to be an America First candidate? And I think I'm that guy.
But in terms of the politics of it all, you know, at the end of the day, whoever is left as that Trump alternative is going to have to take on and beat the former president, you know, either on the debate stage or through campaigning, which could be a slog, punch for punch. Do you think you can take on and beat Donald Trump punch for punch?
It's not about taking on or beating Donald Trump, in my opinion, Steve. It's about taking on the Biden-Harris administration. I'm not going to say things that are negative about the Republicans. I believe that Ronald Reagan was right, the 11th commandment. Thou shalt not speak negatively about a fellow Republican. I'm not going to do that. I didn't do that when I ran for governor. There were several Republicans on the replacement side. I didn't take a shot at anybody because I knew that the issue was Gavin Newsom, the way he shut down the state, the way people are leaving, the homelessness, the crime, the poor schools. And I stayed focused on that, and I'm going to do that here.
But due respect, you know, when you get to the primary here in New Hampshire, whenever the date is actually set for it, on that ballot will be your name and a list of Republicans. The Biden name will not be on there for the primary election, so you'll be running against those other Republicans.
No, I'll be running against the Biden administration. I'll be auditioning to the American people for that person who can take on Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in November 2024 and who can win.
Okay.
Nice try, but well done, Steve. I'm impressed. You went at a bunch of different angles, but no. Honestly, when I ran for governor, I have an interview, and somebody said, let's play a lightning round. And they said, John Cox. John Cox is the guy that Gavin Newsom ran in 2018 and defeated. And I said, I'm not playing your game. The game is Gavin Newsom. The game is, why do we have this homeless problem? Why do we have the fact that people are leaving California for the first time in 170 years? Why is the average price of a home in California 175% above the national average? I stayed focused on that. I'm going to stay focused on the fentanyl, on the borders, on the crime, on the inflation, on the gas prices, the way this man has weaponized the FBI. That's what I'm going to stay focused on. And I'm going to let the American people know that I will do that. And when I get into the office in January 2025, I'm going to be somebody who's going to advance their interests.
Fair enough. I've heard you say as well, you're from the Republican wing of the Republican Party. You say your party in some places has strayed too far from its principles. Where is that?
In spending. You know, I'm a big fan of Ronald Reagan. He was the greatest president in my lifetime, Steve, and he ran to end the Department of Education, which at the time was fairly new, and he also promised to rein in spending. When he left, the Department of Education was bigger than ever, and spending was more than ever. Under Donald Trump, the government grew. We need an amendment to fix spending to a certain percentage of the GDP, with exceptions for war and for natural disaster. I know that's going to be a long slog, but I'm going to use my power as a president, the bully pulpit, to explain to the American people, young people like you, the so-called entitlements programs are not going to be there for you unless we reform them. The word unsustainable to refer to the entitlements programs was used by Barack Obama. It was used by Bill Clinton, but nothing gets done because it's electoral suicide to run claiming you're going to do this, this, and this with the so-called entitlements programs. So the only way they're going to be reformed is to force politicians to reform them by amending the Constitution to fix spending to a certain percentage of the GDP. Go into a locked room, you don't come out until you've done that, and then you can say to the voters, I'm sorry, the devil made me do it. Please don't hurt me in the ballot box.
And I did, while you were here, want to ask you about this. Obviously, you're from California, like we've talked about. New report this week finds that a third of all people who are unhoused in the U.S. live in California. New Hampshire, despite our much smaller size, obviously, also finds itself dealing with a homelessness crisis. I'm sure you've heard about it as you've been campaigning. Perhaps not at the same scale as California, but still very serious. And a lot of it comes down to the root issue from that study and also what we've been finding in this state, the cost of housing, a lack of affordable housing. Now, I know you're really big on federalism. Is this something that a President Elder would take on head on, or is this an issue for the states to deal with by themselves?
It's a state issue, but I can certainly talk about what I think ought to be done. And it's not just an affordability problem, although that's a big problem. It's also a problem of mental health, alcoholism, drug abuse. It's a lot of things. Family breakdown. For example, California is 6.5% black, Steve. 40% of the homeless in California are black. How can that be? Because of a huge breakdown in the black family. So it's a lot of things. But we have to ask ourselves, do you think it is okay for people to sleep on the streets? Do you think it is okay for people to be a biohazard because of the waste? Because these people on the streets are often near schools. And the answer is, if you don't think it's okay, what are you going to do about it? And the answer is, if there is a bed, this person shall go to that bed, or go to rehab, or go to jail. That's the only way to solve this problem. But what happens is, as soon as you do that, somebody sues, claims that you're violating their rights, and then nothing gets done. We have to make a decision. Are we going to permit this? If the answer is no, there's plenty of money for beds for individuals, and if there's a bed available, that person shall get up off the street and go to that shelter. And if you're not willing to go to that shelter, then you go to rehab. If you're not willing to do that, you go to jail. Unless we're willing to make those decisions, we're going to have this problem. And the problem is all over America. If it were easy to solve, it would be solved.
And finally, I did want to ask, obviously you've been here the last couple of days in the state, starting to meet Granite State voters. This is very much a retail politics state. California's a bit different. It's a big media market driven state when it comes to campaigning. So will we expect to see you here on the ground a lot in New Hampshire?
You're going to get sick of seeing me. I'll be here in Iowa. I'll be here in New Hampshire. Iowa has 99 counties, twice as many counties as California, and they expect you to be in every single one of them, otherwise you're not taken seriously. So you're going to get sick of me, Steve.
Presidential candidate Larry Elder, we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
And please go to elderforpresident.com. Throw something in the tip jar. Get me up there that 40,000 individual donors. You can donate as little as $1.
See you on the debate stage if that happens. All right, Mr. Elder, thank you.